welcome everybody back to the Gems Report podcast. I'm joined here by a couple of new friends.
Mike Doss. Been in EMS since 1990. Retired full-time from 911 Nashville Fire just that 3 years ago yesterday. Got into teaching. It is a completely different animal. I've taught a couple of classes, have taken the level 1 and all of the requirements to teach in EMS in Tennessee. But have written a couple of articles for GEMS, and one rather caught the eye of the national standards of teaching, and they said, "Hey, you can't do that. Don't do that. That's wrong." It's like, oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Please educate me on what to do properly, because I am not above learning.
And I'm William Belk. I'm the Director of Simulation and Innovation for one of the larger air medical companies here in the U.S. And not quite as many years as Mike on the truck and on the aircraft, but coming up on, it'll be 20 years here in May for me in EMS and flight paramedicine, ground EMS, of course. And then a little bit on the side doing, search and rescue, mountain recovery, that kind of stuff, and dive rescue. But for the last 10, we'll call it 10 years. It's been a little bit more than that, but last 10 years, heavily involved in healthcare simulations, specifically looking at EMS and pre-hospital training.
Awesome. Well, hey, I'm really excited to have both of you here. And, I think we already had some great exchanges kind of back and forth about the article, and I'll be sure to link to it so that if anybody hasn't seen it, you can go check it out. But Mike, if you want to kind of just go through some of your thoughts on the article and what the impetus was for you to write it, and where where that kind of where a lot of that stems from.
Well, having been a preceptor on the truck for many years for students of different levels, they would all come in and they would be prepared for, let's just say, predetermined outcomes. And they didn't have a scenario for, oh my God, what do I do now that I have done everything I'm supposed to and it didn't work? And so that was kind of my catalyst for that. And again, having done the level 1 instructor course and having done a couple of classes, I felt that students might need a Kobayashi Maru, where nothing goes right, or they do everything exactly right and it still doesn't come out. So after seeing the responses from a couple of different people, I could see where that might be detrimental to brand spanking new EMS students, and that might be more of a advanced level activity that we might want to get them to look at, as opposed to getting the skills down, doing it, knowing it, getting it down perfect, and then throwing the curveballs. So I appreciate the feedback, and I have incorporated that into my class now. So that's where I am.
Well, and that's I think it's great that we can have those types of dialogue and have that exchange back and forth, and that's truly over the years what's helped the profession grow to what it is, and what's going to help us to continue growth from there. I think there were some good takeaways from your article that I did enjoy, and I think there's definitely some merit there, and that's why I wanted the three of us to be able to get together and kind of have this conversation, because as you alluded to, that that tactic or technique is not necessarily 100%. It's not completely useless. It has a place, but oftentimes not when people are encoding new information, and it doesn't always allow that space for for learning to happen with a primary educator. The other thing to that is, on my side, my opinion, and then I'll kind of pop it back to you, William, and let you kind of give some of your perspective. But we've got to be able to, when it comes to performance under stress and being able to help someone augment that, we've got to be able to, if you will, turn the temperature up and down based on how that person is performing, and not necessarily have a predetermined, this is absolutely 100% going to fail. I'm also not advocating for the everybody gets a trophy, middle school soccer either. That's not, that's not going to win. We've just got to be able to have an ability to modulate that and find that happy ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talked, I think our discourse, or whatever you want to call it, going back and forth between the three of us, and Mike and I had a really good call a couple of weeks ago. You pointed out some good things, right? These are people that are going to work in not perfect conditions. They're going to work in hostile environments. They need to be prepared to deal with things that may or may not be something we can teach in a classroom. And whether that's the loss of a patient, or whether that's everything just going wrong for that day, or whether the fact your coworker showed up hungover or sick or ill and is not as useful as they should be to you, all of those things are important. So yeah, it definitely wasn't that none of these things should ever happen. The bigger thing is looking at, and you said it yourself, the Kobayashi Maru, which coincidentally or ironically, however you want to look at this, I gave a presentation years ago in Wyoming for their state trauma conference. And I went to paramedic school in Wyoming a long time ago. So I was kind of returning home, if you will. And I used the Kobayashi Maru as an example as well, of saying, hey, we have to have listed objectives. We have to have known outcomes, and we have to be able to debrief this. And we'll talk a little bit about competition versus actual education scenarios. But at the end of the day, if I can't come in and say, this is exactly what went wrong in this scenario, and this is what we should take away from this, and be able to debrief that with the students and give them something they can hold on to, they're not actually learning anything from that scenario other than they can't really trust me as an educator, right? So if we go in there and I say, hey, you did everything right, this patient was going to die no matter what, or hey, you did everything right and the hospital was going to be, completely overloaded, you're going to have to go somewhere else, and because of the extra time, they were going to die and there's nothing you can do about it, that doesn't really give them anything to learn from it. Other than anytime I put them in a scenario in the future, now they can't really trust what it is that I'm giving them. And they have to assume anything that goes wrong, well, it's not my fault that it went wrong. It's the instructor who's kind of screwing with me here. And that's really the underlying problem here. So the Kobayashi Maru, as we all know, or hopefully we all know if you're Star Trek fans, the only way that Kirk won is he cheated, right? So that's what we're instilling in students. If we create those types of scenarios, is I cannot win this because no matter what I do, this instructor is always going to find something wrong with me or find fault. And I experienced this in paramedic school. I know you guys probably experienced this in paramedic school. We've been around a long time. And not only that, but as we've built educators over the years, and Mike, you mentioned you took an actual formal education class. But what we normally see is somebody comes into EMS education. They're relatively new to education, whether they came into it by choice, whether it was due to something else that kept them off the truck, or whatever the reason is that they got into it. Everybody comes into it thinking that they've got this bright new idea, or they've invented something super powerful that everybody needs to know about. But there's very little communication in the EMS education industry. There's very little between us for me and Mike to communicate and go, you know what? Hey, we've been there. It doesn't really work. Or, hey, that's a great idea, and here's how we think we can improve upon it. We all are kind of fighting our own way, though. And I was the same way when I came into education. We all are having to start from scratch. We're creating our own processes. And it's not until we reach out and speak to other educators, or we reach out to other industries even and say, how are you guys teaching this? Or what can we learn from these other industries, that we start to realize we're not nearly as alone as we thought we were, right? And there is a whole industry out there of healthcare simulation, teaching nursing students, doctors, whatever it is that they're teaching, other groups, respiratory therapists, and not only in healthcare, but pilots, right? We're looking at seeing this in every other industry using simulation. We need to learn from what's going on everywhere else and then bring that back into EMS education to kind of break that pattern of, well, when I went through school, everybody made my life a living hell to make sure that I was tough enough to handle the job. So obviously now that I'm an instructor, I'm going to make it suck for everybody else to make sure they're tough, right? And that's what we're trying to get over and what we're trying to break.
I think possibly what we need to instill in our students, that and what they need to learn up front from the very beginning, it is not all rainbows and puppies, and it's going to suck some days. And they're going to be thrown into situations where no matter what they do, it's your patient's going to die.
Yeah, no, I think you definitely have a point, Mike. Like we don't get to decide the calls every day, right? And the same is true for us. With our organization, we don't know what we're going to show up to every day. So coming into a training already knowing what it is that we're expected to do isn't always applicable, because I don't have that whole guidebook handed to me before I go off and take a flight somewhere. And so there is definitely a line between, hey, I'm not going to do this because I don't feel like I'm going to benefit from it. But also the more important line there is for us as educators to look at it and go, is this truly beneficial, or is it more harmful than good? And I we're talking about pediatric death in this case, and we talked about that a little bit here. The big issue with this scenario is there's no identifiable reason for the death in the case, right? So we're talking about a patient that no matter what we do is going to die. And if we do everything perfect, I think the partner passes out at some point. We don't have the equipment that we need. Everything is there. In a realistic scenario, if I am the provider, I take the time, I check my equipment off. I'm not going to show up and not have my equipment because I took that out. So that's eliminated, right? So then I may be dealing with, okay, my partner's not feeling so well. And if we're really talking about that, then who becomes the bigger priority for us? If we have a partner that passes out or goes into cardiac arrest, where is my allegiance going to fall with taking care of, now I have two separate patients, right? And so what we need to focus on, it's not that we can never kill a patient in simulation. It's that it needs to be appropriate for the scenario. And when a patient does die in simulation, so if that is the learning objective, that's the outcome. How do we handle delivering bad news to the family? How do we sit down and debrief our own feelings following the loss of a patient? All of those are appropriate learning objectives if they are clearly stated up front. But also more importantly than that, when we can then still show a reason. If a patient dies in a simulation case, or better yet, if a patient dies in the field, despite all of our better efforts, there is almost always an underlying reason. There's an explanation. There's something that I can get to of, well, the patient's trauma was too bad and there was nothing I could do for this patient. Or we got him to the hospital and what we didn't know is they had a dissecting AAA, right? So there's something that is going to give me that answer of why this guy died. What we can't do as educators is simply say, all right, Mike, you guys are going to run through this case. You guys did everything perfect. Patient died anyway. There's really no explanation there. There's no reason for that patient to die other than no matter what decision I make, it's always going to end this way. So really my decisions, my benefit, whatever it is that I'm providing doesn't matter. And so the care that I'm providing doesn't matter. That's the hang up on cases like this is if we're going to kill a patient, that's okay. We can do it. And I'm not saying we should let everyone opt out of every scenario where a patient dies. I'm saying there should be a very clear reason why that patient dies so that when we sit down and debrief it, we can explain it to them. Look, you guys, this is everything that you saw. Here's what you either couldn't see, or here's what was going on with this patient, or you missed this key detail, and that's what led to X, Y, and Z occurring. There needs to be a reasonable explanation and an outcome for every scenario we run, and it needs to be strictly tied to the learning objectives that we've laid out before we go into those cases. And that's, again, back to the Kobayashi Maru thing. That's where the Kobayashi Maru gets a little bit gray, because Kobayashi Maru is a no-win scenario. You fail no matter what. Everything you do, you will die. There is nothing we can do about this. And again, not you will die as a provider. That was a Kobayashi Maru reference. But no matter what, we are going to lose this battle. And so what we need to do is find a way to balance that stress training or that stress inoculation. I know you mentioned that. Mike's brought that up. He and I had a good talk about that the other day, about how we need to build those things over time to get those people kind of into that position. But we need to find a way to introduce healthy amounts of stress to our healthcare simulation scenarios, maybe introduce the death of a patient, maybe introduce a pediatric trauma patient, whatever it is. But we can't throw all of that stuff into a box and say, everything that you did was right. This patient died anyway because I said so.
I can see that. Again, after reading the couple of responses that I got, that makes sense. What is... and of course, drawing from my years, like you said, the way I was taught, and then, of course, the way I'm teaching now, and having been a really huge advocate for peer support and mental health advocacy, after reading your responses, it's like, well, that needs to start in the classroom, not necessarily after they get out into the field where they've been exposed to, the Kobayashi Maru 100 times, and they feel like they're a failure or imposter syndrome. It needs to be addressed up front, right in the classroom. So We actually here in Tennessee, starting this year, we started one of our new modules for the class was mental health resilience. For EMS providers. So I get how that would be very beneficial for especially our new providers that have never been in the field.
I love
and I think it's so important to start to see more and more agencies and entities adding that resilience to formal training, because that is so important and impactful. And something that you just said, Mike, that I believe is true, is that does have to start from their initial training, and it is important that they understand the stressors of the job and the things that we can do to be resilient, and also understand the healthy and unhealthy effects of stress. This is something, because they're going to be exposed to it. That's why I don't really necessarily like the stress inoculation per se. I like to look at it more as stress exposure training, because what I really want to be able to, I don't want to inoculate myself from the stress. I want to understand what's going to happen when I'm trying to function under stress, experience the good effects that I get from stress, the increased cognitive processing, improvement in thoughts. But I also want to know when I'm starting to experience some of the negative or degrading experiences of stress. And that's something that we've got to be able to modulate those scenarios to be able to turn that up and down and keep that person in that point where, because everybody's going to respond a little bit differently, especially as they're initially learning. So we've got to be able to, if, as I said before, kind of, if you will, turn the volume up and down to modulate that appropriately. And something else that I think is really important, this we have to do from a society standpoint, and some agencies are better than others, but we've got to reframe the way we look at failure. And that's got to happen. That's got to happen from the beginning. We've got to get away from this culture that failure is bad, because I've learned very little from things I've gotten right. I've learned an immense amount from mistakes that I've made. So that's where we have to understand that failure can sometimes be that catalyst to help us grow. And it keeps us pushing ourselves and knowing that we're still trying to push that edge and sharpen what we're doing.
I can give you a perfect example of that. Yesterday in our psychomotor skills, out of my 7 students, one of them didn't quite cut the mustard the first time. So they had me go out and speak with this person, and I said, "You did great on this, this, and this, but you need to listen and pay attention to what your proctor is telling you. Don't make stuff up. Don't make it worse than it is." And they got it back together. They chilled for a minute, and then they went in there and nailed it.
And Mike, what you're talking about right now, that's perfect groundwork for why we need structured debriefing, right? So we can sit down and we can get a feeling about what are they going through, what were they thinking as they were going through these scenarios, because there's a drastic difference in, hey, let's talk about some things you could have done better, and hey, what do you think you did wrong in there, right? Like those two questions, they have the same outcome, but they feel very different on the receiving end. And it's the same thing as, hey, let's talk about your thought process when you were doing XYZ, versus, well, what the hell were you thinking, right? It's really that same. We're trying to make sure that we're using structured processes. We go through them step by step. We have a methodology that's in place, not only because it's going to help us get better information out of our students, but it's going to also get them to self-reflect and make their own decisions about their own performance. All of those things are going to improve it. And Mike brought up a good point about the stress inoculation. It's easy to reminisce about the old days and complain about how things once were, but we do repeat some of these mistakes, right? And I will never forget, when I was a paramedic student, a lot like our scenario we're talking about here, we had this bay off the side of our classroom where we had one of those simulated ambulances. It was actually built when I was in paramedic school, but they had a little simulated ambulance in there. We used that for a lot of our scenario training. And we were running scenarios one day, and we got told, hey, you're responding to, I think it was a shooting scenario. I don't even remember the scenario all that well, but I remember that they'd had like a strobe light in there and loud music and fog going. And so, of course, we did the smart thing, which is, well, we're going to send PD in here first. So the instructor comes back and says, well, police have cleared the scene. You guys are good to go in. So we go in, we run this whole scenario. I think it was 2 or 3 patients. We haul them back out to the classroom. We sit down afterwards, and the instructor goes, well, you all failed. And what the hell do you mean we all failed? Well, you didn't check the drawers. Go look in the drawers. So we go in the other room, and we open a drawer. Now, mind you, the drawer is a permanent part of this classroom. So in our minds, it has nothing to do with the scenario. And as we open the drawer, there's a hand grenade in there, right? It has nothing to do with the learning objective. It has nothing to do with the scenario. It has nothing to do with what we're supposed to be teaching. But it put us in a situation that even though we asked them to clear the scene, even though they told us the scene was clear, they then came back later and decided we failed anyway because of it. And so this is kind of laying that groundwork of psychological safety is important. I have to be able to trust my instructors, but I also have to be able to fail comfortably and fail safely. And that's kind of what Mike was talking about earlier. I need other Mike. This is only mildly confusing to anyone on the radio, not actually seeing who I'm pointing at when I'm talking. But this is one of the things we were just talking about around simulation is that safe space. It has to be that safe space. There is room for high stakes simulation training. There are times where we're going to actually be summative with what we're doing. We're actually scoring people, but we need to be able to lay that groundwork if you're coming into the lab to say, look, this is what we expect of you. And it's okay to make mistakes here, because every mistake we make here is hopefully one less mistake we're going to make out there. As you mentioned a few minutes ago, we learn more from those failures than we do from our successes. But let's make those failures somewhere where I'm not afraid to admit to them and I'm willing to learn from them. And that's why, it's not all holding hands and cupcakes all the time, but that's why we have to create an environment where they can come in, they can make mistakes, and they know that it doesn't matter if they screw up here, that we can sit down, we can talk about it, they can learn from it. And then if we want to, we go right back in there and we run it again like you did with your student yesterday. That's fantastic, right? Give them an opportunity to try it again. That's not always the case, but it does work that way. But we need to create that space where they're comfortable with us and they can trust us. Doesn't mean we can never deceive them. But when we're using deception and simulation, it's usually in competition settings, which we'll talk, I talk about this. Competition scenarios, like you see if you go to GEMS, the conference, if you go to EMS World, if you come see us at AMTC or CCTMC, that is not actual simulation training, because they're not there to learn anything. They're there to play a game. And we can do a lot with those people where there is no expectation of trust. They know they're going to get messed with. They know they're going to see things that are either unrealistic or extremely difficult to take care of, above and beyond their skill set or the equipment they're carrying with them. They entered into that agreement willingly. That's the difference between it being a game versus like a serious game, which is something that's fun and we've created it, but it has a purpose of education. Simulation competitions aren't designed that way, and so we can get away with it. When we're talking about the scenarios that we're using to actually train people every day, they don't get to choose us, right? They didn't come into this class and go, well, I'm going to volunteer to go have fun in this today. We're throwing it at them, and they have to go through it as part of their curriculum. That's where we have to make sure that we're protecting them as they go through it.
I will tell you what my other 6 students told me when they came out of their psychomotor skills. They said, that was much easier than what you put us through in class. The proctors came to me and said, your students were amazing. It was hard for me to keep up with the skill sheets.
Yep.
So
that's
yeah, they were going so fast. I said, you've got 10 minutes to do it. And, they had, I think 15 minutes was their max. So I made sure they knew it backwards and forwards. And so I get it. They absolutely need to know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what not to do. I think that's the biggest thing, is what not to do, even though you can do something.
Yeah, a couple additional takeaways that I had from what you said, William, is I'm glad I didn't go through your paramedic class. I mean, hand grenades, come on.
I used a lot less F words telling that story here than I normally do.
What kind of instructor has a hand grenade in the classroom? That's
former Marine.
So, well, that makes sense then. And something else that I think is really important, especially as we look at, we look at any kind of training, but specifically in simulation, is the importance of that debrief. I liken it to exercise, and a lot of times people want to skip the stretching after you're done, but that's the most important part, right? And that's kind of similar to the debrief. After the simulation or the training that we've done, we've got to have that debrief so that we can continue to learn and improve. Know that the information is getting transferred in both directions, back and forth. Very similar to a hot wash after an incident. That's how we can talk through that and understand that we were successful. So I think it's, I'm really glad that you highlighted the importance of the debrief. And Mike, I'm so glad that your students were well prepared for their psychomotor exams. That's
Speaking
awesome.
of the debriefs, during class, during our psychomotor, skills testing in class, we would talk about, and I would have, a student be lead, and then give them as much help as they needed. And then after the scenario, I would ask everyone in class. I would go around the class, hey, what did they do right? What did they do wrong? What would you have done different? Instead of giving them the answers, I made them come up with the answers.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is kind of that plus delta, right? Like what went well and what would we change next time? That is about as basic as we can get, but it gives that opportunity for it not to be us telling them what's going wrong, telling them what we saw. It gives them the opportunity to self-reflect and tell you as an instructor, like, oh, well, here's what I learned coming out of this. And much like, other Mike said a few minutes ago, sometimes we learn more from our own experiences, our own failures, than we do from actually, succeeding. We learn a lot more when we realize our own shortcomings than we do when someone else tells them to us, right? If you come to me and you tell me all the ways I'm screwing up, I'm already going to be defensive. I'm not really listening. If you get me to realize that I'm screwing up, that is a much more powerful moment for me to go, oh my God, yeah, this is important and I need to do better next time at these things. There is a ton of great resources out there for debriefing. And they all take a lot of practice. There's no easy road to becoming a debriefer. You're talking about doing plus delta. That's a very easy thing to get started with. But even that, if I come to you and I say, hey, Mike, what went well in there? You go, well, the airway. I'm like, okay, let's push a little further, right? What went well about this airway? Well, I feel like we work good as a team. How did you work well as a team? Well, every time I communicated something, he gave it a call back and we made sure that we didn't make any mistakes. We're finally getting somewhere, right? It takes a little prodding sometimes to get beyond that. But there's a lot of great resources, a lot of debriefing methods. I don't think we subscribe to any one of them. I think you learn from as many as you can and kind of apply from each piece as much as you can. But if you're looking for something that will get you kind of a really good introduction to that, the Academy Archives, the Debriefing Academy out of Canada, has online training as well as in-person and remote training for that. And they do a really good job of breaking down those high-level debriefs into how, basically just running you through drills over and over again to kind of build your skills up. And those are the guys that actually wrote the Pearls debriefing paper that teaches the Pearls concept. So again, if it's something you're looking for, I think that's a great place to start.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that, for passing along the resource. That's helpful. Either of you have anything to say as we kind of round this out? We're sitting just shy around 30 minutes. So any closing thoughts?
I will say this, an adage that I learned many years ago is, if I say it, they tend to doubt it, but if they say it, they'll believe it.
Yep. Yeah, that's that debriefing piece we were just talking about entirely.
Yeah.
Guys, I think the real thing I want to leave this off at is just kind of pointing out, it's not this is an ongoing improvement for all of us, whether it's EMS education, Mike was teaching EMT classes, whether it's paramedic students, more, as we get a little bit further, whether it's practicing paramedics or nurses or whoever else. The big thing here is making sure that we all understand that we're in this together. It's a team effort. It always will be. It's not the academics with, all the degrees and credentials versus the people in the field that are doing this every day. It's making sure that we all come together and go, you know what? We were there too. I went through the same setting in paramedic school for the last, 10 years. I pushed really hard on EMS educators to break that pattern of, well, let's just make their life suck because they have to be tough, right? And that's what we need to do going forward, is making sure that we learn from our past mistakes while also inviting in all of that new research, that new evidence that's coming out around education and how people learn as adults, especially adult learners, and implementing that into programs, because otherwise we will just continue to repeat the same pattern, right? A lot of us get into teaching after years and years of experience, and our experience learning is what we went through. So then we just turn around and repeat the same thing. And so that's my takeaway from all of this. I think, like I said, I think Mike's intentions were always good. I think he was working through things, trying to do the best he could with the resources he had. And sometimes I know, Mike, from your standpoint, it doesn't feel that way because you got a whole bunch of people sending stuff to you saying, hey, this is what everything else is saying. But what matters here is that we all learn from each other and that we continue to work collaboratively going forward as we come out of this.
100%. I agree. And I appreciate the feedback.
I'm thankful we were able to make this connection, have this conversation, and hopefully others can benefit from it as well. And hopefully this can start to open up an avenue for educators from all over the country to be able to connect with one another and identify best practices and be able to further grow as educators. There's a lot of educational curricula that exist that can be helpful with that. But I don't think there's really anything that's much more beneficial than good peer-to-peer conversations and being able to learn from one another, just like we want to be able to teach our students. So I thank you both for your time and your obvious passion about education and EMS. And that's why we're happy that you read GEMS and that you're a part of the GEMS community, and we just want to continue this healthy conversation. So I thank you both for your time and your passion.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you.
Have a great day, guys.